Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I am Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with ASHI, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, ASHI's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We are an international association with about 1,000 members spread across more than 20 countries, including Finland and South Africa. We serve as a professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, networking tools, and educational events, such as today's webinar and an annual conference and expo, which was held in Pittsburgh at the beginning of October. ASHI 2019 will take place October 27th to 30th next year in Spokane, Washington. We hope to see you all there. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@ashi.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording and presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub after the live broadcast. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Julian Cross-Polk is a consultant for Friends of the Earth's Food and Agriculture Program. He's the co-author of multiple reports on climate-friendly food service, which assess the carbon, water, and cost savings from strategic food shifts. Garrett DiStefano is the Director of Residential Dining and Sustainability for the award-winning UMass Amherst Dining. He is passionate about the program's success and unwavering in his commitment to UMass Dining's mission, healthful, sustainable, delicious world cuisine, and to build a community around food. Alison Leach is a PhD candidate in Natural Resources and Earth System Science at the Sustainability Institute of the University of New Hampshire. She's one of the leads on their new Sustainability Indicator Management and Analysis platform, the SIMAP tool. More information about the presenters is found on the ASHI website under this webinar listing. At this time, I'd like to welcome all of our attendees and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn things over to Julian to get us started.
All right, hello everyone. Let's see, I'll put it into presentation mode. Let's see, there we go. Thanks Daita for the nice introduction, and thanks so much to all the attendees who are joining us today to talk about healthy, climate-friendly food service, a multi-benefit strategy to reduce food footprints. I'm really excited to be presenting today with Garrett and Ali, two kind of pioneers in this work. I'll just get us started. So just an overview of what we'll be talking about today. I'm going to start things off with kind of just defining what really is healthy, climate-friendly food, and then talk a little bit about kind of the reasons why it's important, the public health consensus around it, sort of the climate and environmental case for it, and then also the cost-effective aspect of climate-friendly food as well. And then I'll also be talking a little bit about Friends of the Earth's Better Burger strategy, and then kind of sum things up with some takeaways. And then Garrett will be talking about UMass Dining, who's kind of an exemplar in this work. And then finally, Ali will be discussing the SIMAP tool, which is a comprehensive kind of sustainability tracking tool. Great, so to start things off, I know this is kind of breaking the rule for most presentations. You're not supposed to have so many words on a slide. But we think at Friends of the Earth, we think it's kind of important to have a comprehensive definition for healthy, climate-friendly food service. And I really want to emphasize healthy because it's possible to have climate-friendly food service that's not healthy, and so it's important to include that element. And the next thing I'd like to emphasize is the fact that healthy, climate-friendly food service can be achieved in in incremental steps. And I think it should be achieved in incremental steps because we're kind of talking about a cultural shift. And so working with students and the context that you're working within is really important. So these shifts should be incremental. And really the heart of the definition is, climate-friendly food means offering a wider array of healthy, plant-forward and plant-based foods, as well as reducing food waste. And those are kind of the two key strategies in food service that are known to reduce your carbon footprint, for one. And then we kind of say, on top of that, sourcing food from regenerative farms, sustainably produced, that kind of promote healthy soil practices, as well as kind of doing what a lot of cafeterias are already starting to do when they think about sustainability, is like the energy and water saving measures within the dining halls. A lot of folks are focusing on those energy and water saving measures, but don't really think about the food that's purchased. And so we're trying to add that dimension to the kind of current sustainability efforts. And then finally, we think it's extremely important to educate students. I think there's a huge opportunity with K through 12 food service and college and university food service to really kind of shape the next generation of conscious consumers, both for health and environmental reasons. So moving on to the public health consensus for less meat and more plants. And there is really a pretty strong public health consensus currently around this issue. So all these credible organizations listed below have public statements around, recommending less meat and more plants. Kaiser Permanente, which is the nation's largest healthcare network, encourages its physicians to recommend a plant-based diet to patients struggling with chronic illnesses, such as heart disease, diabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. And then the American Medical Association, actually just in 2017, recommended that hospitals offer patients plant-based meals and actually completely eliminate processed meats entirely. So that just kind of shows that there's a really strong kind of consensus around this. And speaking of processed meats, that is an issue where there's probably even more consensus, particularly around the kind of dangers of processed meats. And in 2015, the World Health Organization evaluated over 800 studies, and I think it was 22 scientists in multiple countries, and they concluded that processed meat is a carcinogen for humans, and based on evidence of increased colorectal cancer. And the U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the Harvard School of Public Health have kind of issued statements, saying similar things. And yeah, so that kind of really sums up the the health case for eating less meat. And it's kind of, it's less meat. It's not, you don't need to eliminate meat completely. It's just thinking about trying to, the trendy term is flexitarian. So just incorporating more plant-based proteins into your diet. And so now moving forward to the environmental case for more plants and less meat. This graph is a little complicated at first, but I'll help to kind of break it down with you. Pretty much on the right side, you have the animal-based products. And then on the left side, on the left side of the dashed line, you have the plant-based products. And you'll see that, as the title suggests, animal foods are just more resource intensive in all these categories, from land use to water use to and especially greenhouse gas emissions, disproportionately actually. So if you look at beef, the orange bar is greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of the reason for the greenhouse gas emissions being so high for beef in particular is because beef is a ruminant, and so it actually produces methane through, by breaking down the foods that it's consuming. It has methanogenic bacteria in its gut, which essentially produce methane, which is 25 times as potent as carbon as a greenhouse gas. And so that kind of like makes beef disproportionately more impactful than some of these other products. Just to put that in some context, the beef has 25 to 30 times as much, carbon impact as, pulses or legumes or beans, which are another plant-based protein. So that kind of gives you sort of the overview. Well, I guess, so other thing I wanted to add is in terms of water, which is increasingly a scarce issue, especially where I'm from, which is California. And the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN cited that a quarter of all fresh water is actually used for livestock. So as we kind of see increasing droughts, especially in my home state, thinking about managing these resources sustainably and responsibly, it's important that we kind of shift our diet accordingly. So, water is another really important issue as well. So I guess, yeah, the last thing I want to mention here is that kind of moving forward, I'm going to be focusing primarily on carbon and nitrogen. And the reason I'm going to do that is because as we get into kind of the application of this information in the food service context, carbon and nitrogen, and you'll see Ali will talk about this, are the kind of two things that we can track. And they're kind of good indicators for some of these other environmental impacts. So talking about carbon, earlier this month, there was a pretty gloomy kind of news that came with the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius. This quote here, there's nothing opaque about this new data. The illustrations of mounting impacts, the fast approaching and irreversible tipping points are visceral versions of a future that no policymaker could wish to usher in or be responsible for. And so that's the former UN climate chief, well accomplished person. And I'll just add to that in this same report, they do make a strong case that we do need to shift our eating habits in order to achieve that 1.5 degree limit. Let's see, and yeah, so moving forward on sort of the greenhouse gas emissions and climate, and kind of the impact of agriculture and then livestock in particular. Today, about 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the livestock sector. So that's more than the entire transportation sector combined, which I think is like kind of a compelling argument, because a lot of people talk about fuel efficiency when it comes to climate. But I mean, really, our diet and what we're eating is equally as impactful. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have fuel efficient cars. We just need to be working on both. And then this year, there was a really compelling study done by Grain and IATP that found that under business as usual, so in other words, if we continue to consume at the rates that we've been consuming, and if other sectors begin to cut emissions in line with the Paris Agreement to try to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius, the livestock sector could actually eat up 80% of our carbon budget. So that's kind of a startling number there, and they continue by saying making it virtually impossible to keep temperatures from rising to dangerous levels past 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in other words, if we ignore this issue, then it will take up our entire carbon budget. So it's extremely critical to think about this moving forward. And then kind of just applying that to, like what does that mean? So this is kind of talking about sort of the planetary boundaries. What does that mean for like exactly like how much do we need to reduce? And there was a recent study actually also 2018 that cited that Western countries, particularly with beef, need to drop or cut, beef consumption by 90%, and then increase the consumption of pulses and beans by 5%. Excuse me, not by 5%, by 5 times. And so that just kind of shows that, yeah, incorporating a far greater number of plant-based proteins into this, into our protein mix is sort of what needs to happen moving forward. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is nitrogen pollution. And nitrogen pollution is a lesser known issue, but it is actually one that has pretty significant environmental consequences. And Ali can kind of answer more questions about this later. She's an expert on nitrogen, but she was explaining to me that there's kind of this nitrogen dilemma. So it is kind of it's a necessary element for life and for producing food. And through a process called the Haber-Bosch, we've been able to essentially synthetically produce nitrogen and then use it as fertilizer to produce food. And the issue is that if there's too much nitrogen in the environment, then it can cause dead zones, hypoxic areas, algal blooms, red tides. It can be the cause of biodiversity loss, smog, acid rain, stratospheric ozone depletion, and climate change as N2O. And then this quote here: the largest cause of this ecological mayhem is the 120 million tons of synthetic nitrogen used globally in agriculture each year. And I wanted to kind of mention that, and this in the same article, they cite that that's twice the amount produced by organic sources. And so thinking about kind of moving from conventionally produced meat and plant products to more organic products is another way of addressing this nitrogen issue. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Better Burger, which incorporates ideally organic, sustainably produced beef, as well as less of it, but I'll go into that. And yeah, I'll move forward there. So kind of summing up this kind of sustainability section, this is a graph which I really like from the World Resources Institute, which essentially shows that so what we've figured out is established so far is that climate friendly foods are healthier, that we would figure out that plant-based proteins are both more climate friendly and they're also healthier. And then what this graph shows is they can also be more cost effective, or they can also be cheaper. And so you see that the plant-based proteins on the top, the big ones here, beans, chickpeas, and lentils, are far less expensive than the typical animal-based proteins, which have a higher impact. And so it's kind of like layering all these things together, which creates the really compelling case for why we need to transition towards more plants. And then this is just me kind of layering on some of Ali's data, which shows that poultry has 13.5 times as much nitrogen pollution as beans, and then beef has 23 times as much nitrogen pollution as beans. So that's just kind of adding that nitrogen element into this graph. And I know that was a lot of data and information, and so we'll have a section at the end if anybody has questions to clarify any of that background information. So plant forward is trending. Here, this is there is extreme trend right now around plant forward, and more, especially younger generations, are really into this. Daita, I think if you have that video, I think we're just going to play that video quickly.
Yeah, 1 second, let me get it started.
So this is a study that was funded by Aramark, actually, but it's a survey of higher education institutions, and it has some really compelling data around this plant forward sort of. Great. So yeah, that was, it kind of, hopefully that was compelling to you. It was certainly compelling to me. And it was interesting that, one of the larger food service companies was promoting, plant forward in that way, which kind of shows the trend in itself. Yeah, so I think some of the things that popped out there is that across all regions, it was kind of equally people saying that they want more plant-forward foods, and then also that the priority being just providing those options as being a really important part of it. And then I think lastly, the fact that people are motivated by health reasons primarily, it sort of affirms what I was talking about around the public health consensus. There's a pretty strong public health consensus amongst the healthcare professionals, and that's sort of, I think, seeping into the younger generations, and I think the general the zeitgeist, I guess. So moving forward, the last thing that I kind of want to address in kind of making the case for climate-friendly food is the issue of food waste. So food waste is a huge issue in this country. Perhaps you all have heard the statistic that 40% of food in this country gets wasted. And that essentially means that all the resources that I was just talking about, that go into producing this food are wasted as well. And it also means that, the more resource intensive foods are a bigger deal to waste. So the same report, actually, the Natural Resource Defense Council that came up with the 40% number also said that resource intensive animal foods account for about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions from food waste. So reducing waste of animal products is the most effective way to kind of make an impact and save embedded water, energy, and other resources. So that's a quick plug for food waste reduction measures. So now transitioning to sort of the institutional food service setting. This is a graph which I think is really compelling. This is from a 2017 study that I helped author actually on Oakland Unified School District. So this is not a college or university, but it gives you a sense, and I think it would be very similar to college or university. But here you can see that nearly 80% of the nearly 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions from within Oakland Unified School District's food purchasing came from animal products. So in other words, if you're thinking about trying to have a sustainable food service, it's pretty clear that the area that you need to address is animal proteins, animal products. And so I pretty much, showing that graph just to emphasize that point. And this is another graph from that same study, and it kind of just, layers onto the previous conversation around this sort of multi-benefit strategy. So the idea that, you can save money or a lot of cases you either save money or it's cost neutral to make some of these transitions, reduce your carbon footprint significantly, and then also save water and other resources. And then I wanted to highlight the report that we just published in the end of September, which is also dedicated to K through 12 food service. But even if you're working in the college and university food service setting, I would highly recommend you taking a look at this report, because I think it's got a lot of interesting and applicable information. And I just wanted to point out, I've showed a lot of data around the greenhouse gas emissions of different food types. And in this report, we do have a kind of a comprehensive breakdown of the data that we use of what we think are kind of common food types that you might see in an institutional setting. And so, yeah. And from that same report, and this is just to emphasize how even just small shifts can actually make a huge difference. And so this is a graph that is from a case study of the school district of Lee County in Florida. And in 2016, Lee County School District started implementing a Lean and Green Friday. So 8 times per year they started serving. And as part of that, they started using serving a pasta using Beyond Meat, plant-based tomato sauce, replacing their beef tomato pasta. And this swap alone, just serving it 8 times a year, has reduced their footprint by 2.3 million pounds of CO2. And so that, just to kind of put that in context, that is essentially equivalent to driving or not driving 2.6 million miles, or not burning 120,000 gallons of gasoline, or the equivalent to planting 30,000 seedlings and letting them grow for 10 years. So just switching one recipe in one school district has that kind of pretty profound impact. And like I said, in terms of some of these other measures, it's probably one of the most cost-effective climate mitigation solutions. So now, kind of transitioning into solutions a little bit. The Friends of the Earth has been working on a campaign called the Better Burger campaign for the past year. And it's all about shifting the impact of the classic American hamburger with better meat and stealth health. And the idea behind Better Burger is that you are blending at least 30% of the burger with mushrooms, and this has become popular in many food service settings, from business campuses. I think Google might have a blended burger, and to college and universities, and even in K through 12 as well. And on this website here, we've got a bunch of resources for companies that are starting to make these blended burgers. So if as a food service need them pre-made, and then also resources around how to market them, and we've got like great infographics on there as well. So yeah, just kind of going in quickly about the benefits of the Better Burger and defining the Better Burger a little better. So our definition of the Better Burger is a domestic, organic, or grass-fed, with domestic, organic, or grass-fed beef from ideally well-managed animals raised humanely on pasture without the use of routine antibiotics or hormones. And then you replace 30 to 50% of the meat with mushrooms or other veggies to make it a blended burger. And so essentially what you're doing is you're getting the benefits from a sort of well-managed and humanely produced animal product, with also the carbon benefits of reducing the amount of beef. And if you think about it in this institutional setting, when you're serving thousands of burgers per year, that small 30% reduction per burger makes a huge impact over the course of a year, for example. And Yeah, so one clear example of that is I've been working a little bit with the University of North Carolina, Asheville. In the spring of last year, UNCA started serving an amazing local and humanely raised beef burger blended with 30% local and sustainably produced mushrooms. And they're using an awesome product from Hickory Nut Gap, which is a local beef producer here. And it's really pretty amazing what they've done. One thing I thought was kind of great is that it seems that they've kind of gotten the food service to start owning this burger. And although there was some hesitation at the beginning, because of student interest, now the food service staff are more and more into this kind of more sustainable burger. And I also wanted to highlight that that UNCA even got some of the vegan students who oftentimes kind of can be difficult in terms of serving any meat to actually promote this like less and better meat burger, which is awesome. And I did a quick calculation on this and showed that these better burgers cut the GHG emissions per burger by 29%, and that in the 2018-19 school year, I think they're projecting that 14% of burgers will be better burgers, and that switch alone will save 5,000 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions for UNCA. So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, we have got this Better Burger campaign going, and we're really open to work with colleges and universities around the country, and so please reach out. This is the kind of like lead contact right now, and you'll get a copy of these slides if you want to go in. And this is just a link to the website. And so summaries and takeaways. 1, animal foods and food waste have a significant impact on our climate. Shifting diets is urgent. 2, institutional food service has an important role to play to help mitigate those emissions. 3, food shifts start with changing culture. 4, engage with staff and students to be successful and educate. And 5, get creative with recipes. And remember that reducing meat does not have to mean eliminating it. 6, use resources and assistance. You're not alone in this, so please reach out to us and others. And then 7, celebrate success, big or small. And then finally, I have some additional resources here, which you can access maybe after the presentation. That's all I got. So we can transition to Garrett, I think. Thanks so much.
Garrett, you may be on mute. Garrett, we can't hear you, so can you check if your phone is on mute?
Okay, sorry, but can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
Very good. So let me go back. I apologize for that. I apologize so building off of what Julian was talking about, the University of Massachusetts is very much built around healthy, sustainable, delicious food. As you're probably starting to see the slide that I had started off with, we've built our mission around serving local, healthy, and sustainable meals. We are very passionate about how we do this, and it's not just the factor of being I guess a tagline. It weaves itself right into the fiber of how we make decisions and what we do on a day-to-day basis. We want to not only have an opportunity to feed students, but also we want to be able to educate them around what healthy food looks like, what your impact upon not only your health and wellness, but also the environment around you, and also being able to start to develop new markets and able to engage local farmers. Currently, we do business within Massachusetts alone of about $2.5 million, and within the region, in terms of New England, almost $5 million. And we want to commit to continue to grow that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other farmers and other locations and other sustainable practices that we will source, but we also want to be able to give that education to students as to why and what they're eating. But in addition to that, though, you also want to look at the idea of what we're doing in terms of why we make our decisions. And it's easy for us to look at how we make a decision and how it must tie into what our mission is. Overall, our mission is to serve healthy, sustainable, delicious meals in the most environmentally conscious manner possible. Now, why am I continuing to harp on that point? The point is that when you start to look at, why are we driving or what decisions are we making, those decisions are made based upon this mission statement. And, if we're going to make a decision that doesn't really go along with that, then we really have to question why are we doing that. So, at the heart of how we're making our decisions and what we're committed to doing, many things that Julian was talking about in terms of, the not only the environmental, but the economic and also the other long-standing impacts of what we're dining. Currently, UMass Dining feeds roughly 6.5 million meals a year. That's roughly 50,000 meals every single day to over 23,000 folks on our meal plan. And that's a lot of people who we impact when it comes to being a dining provider, as well as the idea of the concept of what dining looks like and why is it important to the overall well-being of our students. And what that means is that many times college and university dining in the past was regarded as basically a lagging indicator, that we weren't really setting any trends. And the fact is that we were kind of right up there along the lines of prison food, so to speak, with the concept that it's very institutional, very 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 driven by passe type of ideas, and it's really not. What we want to do is start to develop a culture around food, and looking at these qualities of what we're looking at on a day-to-day basis. These are the foundations of what we want to look at and why we're doing what we're doing. Creating a sustainability and social responsibility. When you want to look at what we look at in terms of not only what we source, but who we source from and the practices that they make, and understanding the value of the food that we're putting into each and every one of our student customers. We had the opportunity to have a guest chef last week, her name Virginia Willis, and she was talking about the cost of food. And Alice Waters talks about that as well. And when you start to look at putting true value on it, what did that $2 dish really give you? Who actually paid the price to get you that low costing food? What was the environmental impact upon things of that nature? So to look at different things of where food was sourced, and then being able to put a value on why we're choosing to use purveyors that have more of a social responsibility to them, as well as committed to environmentalism, is very important to us as we start to look at that, as well as creating quality experiences within each one of our dining experiences. In addition to that, you start to look at the ever-changing face and background of the students that are dining with us on a day-to-day basis. When we want to look at how the demographic breakdown of the future of food, future students, we're looking at an ever-growing population of Latina, Latino, Hispanic students, especially, and as well as Asian students. So when we start to look at how we start to do menu design, and as Julian was talking about earlier on, looking at more of a plant-based approach, many of these global cuisines are rich history of plant-based ingredients. Rice, beans, legumes, things of that nature are woven into the culture of many of the diets that we're promoting. In addition to that, the idea of customizing dishes. And customization is really important to us in the idea that when you want to look at not only the idea of being able to tailor a meal towards a student that really is unique to that particular student. A stir fry is a prime example of that, where a student can pick out their prime ingredients, but also comes into play in terms of food waste. And Julian was talking a little bit about that earlier on, about how the impact about that is worse than even the transportation of the food to the particular location. So when you want to look at customization of food, you're also looking at ability for us to reduce food waste because of the fact that the meal was made towards what the student would like, as well as in proportion to what that particular customer wants, so that you're not over portioning and you're not adding additional protein, animal protein in certain aspects that you don't necessarily need, as well as the idea of looking into the idea of, and I'll talk a little bit later on about health and wellness and how diet is related to that, which we find a little bit of a sneak preview that plant-based diets actually can help promote academic performance. But when we're going to kind of jump into this concept of modern eating and how we want to look at different ways of how students are eating and we're eating smaller meals more frequently across the day, but as well as this identification with food. And that's where you might see my next slide. For those of you who have read Michael Pollan's book, I did rip off the omnivore's dilemma. So that was not my idea, but it very much suits the concept of what's going on within students. And we survey students and look at them and their dining performance or dining identification. Yes, the majority of students do identify as omnivores. And we have seen a bit of a growth of students who are identifying as flexitarians, as well as even vegetarians and vegans. As slight as it might be, and if at first glance looking at this particular chart, you might think that, wow, then most students are much more animal-based, and that's how they eat, how they identify, and what they eat on a routine basis. And that's where the kind of the dilemma comes into play, where the fact is that how you identify yourself and telling a student that they can't eat something is a bit of a challenge to keep into the long term. But when you start to look at how a student actually eats, and which we're looking at our next slide here, we're looking at a scenario where actually students, even though they do identify as omnivores, if you take a look at the growth of what they're eating, and this is very much, again, in line with when you saw Julian's prior slide of not only the cost, but the environmental impact. Well, the dining preferences of students have much more leaner proteins, plant-based proteins, and we're seeing an explosive growth of that, as well as a reduction in the consumption of beef. Now, again, we're not trying to say you shouldn't. We're just saying that there are that if you're going to, and to the point of eating, better beef, grass-fed, things of that nature, which are very important. But also when you want to look at the globalization of the menu, and you start to look at, why students are eating the way they are, well, we're seeing more self-awareness of what's going on. We're also seeing, obviously, the global palate where grains and beans, legumes, fish are much more prevalent. We know that, at UMass, we're very proud of the fact that students tend to eat more lean proteins, and average consumption of fish is about 21 pounds per capita annually, which is about 7 pounds more than the average American eats. But then you try to stack that up against the Southeast Asian or Norwegian or Scandinavian and Mediterranean diets, and that pales. I mean, it's not even half in terms of what the seafood consumption is in other parts of the world. So we do have a ways to go. It's very promising that we do also have students who tend to want to eat more of the plant-based as well as the seafood-rich diet. And generally speaking, we're serving 3,000 to 4,000 sushi rolls every day, which is more than the consumption of sliced pizza when you want to look at that. And again, it's when you're asking the question as to why a student is eating the way they're eating that way in some cases because they don't have time. So when you start to menu engineer around areas where students are going to be more apt to eat something because they have the opportunity to take it with them in portable food, then in that particular case, you now have started to make the menu more in line with the student lifestyle. In terms of lifestyle, though, when we want to look at how the dining habits and what they're going to be doing into the future once you've left the university, well, we have a great opportunity to continue to direct or also educate students on how to eat and eating healthy as well as responsibly. And as you can see, roughly 80%, according to our spring 2018 survey, said that they're going to continue to eat the way that they did in college, which, looking back at the prior slide over here, means that they're going to see much more of a plant-based diet. You're going to see much more of a diet that's rich in leaner proteins, even after the college years. And as we start to look at what does that look like, what particular types of cuisine are we looking at? Well, we're looking here in terms of what they'd like to see more of when we ask this: a Mediterranean diet, Caribbean, Southeast Asian, as well as even North African. So students, by and large, want to start to look and start to eat more of a plant-based diet, and from not only from a health and wellness, but also even from a financial point of view, that the cost per plate, the cost per menu item, for the cost per pound for beans and balloons is less than it is for beef, as well as the amount of storage space, things like that. There's also a residual costs that go along with how you can have a much more not only environmental friendly as well as healthful as well as economically friendly diet when it comes to starting to moving towards more of a plant-based and plant-forward type of a diet. But looking into, as we start to dive a little bit deeper into our Mediterranean diet, and we start to look at, well, what are these manifestations? What are they putting together? What do they want? Julian talked a bit about blends and things like that with a better burger, as well as looking at things, of not only just burgers, but looking at different types of things where you can put together kofta, using shawarmas, things like that, where you can really, reduce. Our burgers here at UMass are basically 30% mushroom. And that brings out, when you start to look at how you can balance off not only healthfulness but flavor, the umami that goes along with a blended burger with mushroom is tremendous, as well as reducing the amount of beef that we're using on an annual basis. And when you're serving 6 million meals, a 30% reduction is quite significant. But also when you start to look at how we start to looking at the trends and how we start to serve. Gone are the days you're serving large quantities of food all at once. Students, just by nature, the ability for them, that they're transitioning from one place to the next. So the smaller plates are very important, and a variety of plant-based proteins, color, which really pops out at you, the ability to really kind of not only, I guess the idea of eating with your eyes, so you're able to really get a full experience when you're going into a location, and it allows you to put together different types of menu combinations that are also not only tasty but also seasonable as well. Because looking at the seasonality and how we start to incorporate that into our menu cycle is very important to us. When we start to look at not only some of the particular menu items we start to look at here, this is just kind of if we want to look at some of the leaner proteins and how we start to look at things on a day-to-day basis, looking at seafood and plant-based, as well as some of the authentic. When one of the education processes we have to put students through is that there are a lot of misnomers about food, and authentic Italian is not necessarily pizza. There are some of the more traditional menu items that are cornerstones to the Mediterranean diet, grilled fish, sea bass, things like that, utilizing different types of nuts and different types of vegetables, grilling them and having that same flavor profile that puts together that you could, and as you start to look at it, that has the same taste and feel in some cases of meats, but you're utilizing plants to get to that place. Here's some of this is kind of a chart that we pulled together of where we start to look at different menu items when you're looking at it, from Northern Italian to your Greek well as your koftas that you see out of your Turkish and Middle Eastern type of cuisines, you know, and as well as some of the trendier Mediterranean ideas where you start to take the animal protein and using that as maybe as a garnish to, or as a smaller component part, but the center of the plate revolves around the vegetable and revolves around some of the leaner proteins and to that nature. And these are some of the traditional menu items that have been put together for many, many years. Even on our retail side, as we start to look at different types of menu items and how we start to put them together, as we start to look at not only all you care to eat, but also looking at different types of which all you care to eat being kind of buffet style, looking it into different types of our different types of retail concepts that students are eating on the go and throughout the day, both throughout different types of the different day parts. Also, when you start to look at some of the product layouts and let the food kind of speak for itself, as you start to look at, you know, the ability to start to utilize keeping it simple and keeping focus in on the food, as well as the healthfulness and keeping just the idea of how food is in its purest and most simplest sense, but also being able to bring in the world cuisine into it as well. Starting to look at, you know, I wanted to kind of jump from one thing to the next here, but talking about a little bit about how we start to set some goals and what we need to do. And these are why, you know, what we wanted to do. A lot of times you might want to look at, you know, trying to climb that mountain and getting to where you need to be when it comes to setting standards for setting goals for local and healthy foods. You know, it basically has to revolve around how you're starting to develop and looking at your customer base and seeing how you're able to kind of develop menu that's going to start to course correct a little bit, start to move in that correct direction. You know, we've been doing this now going on 10 years, and we started measuring it back in 2014 and setting goals for ourselves to say, okay, we want to be able to do these particular things. And all the while, as interesting as it sounds, we've seen over the same period of time a greater increase in meal participation. We've had greater increases in overall satisfaction. And we've also seen healthier students as we start to look at how we start to develop menu items that are in line with how they want to eat. So, you know, I'm going to break it into some of the keys for success here of how we start to really look at what's important and how we design menu. First and foremost, obviously, you want to look at the sustainability aspect of it. You focusing on local purchasing, looking at different ways that you can not only work within your own organization, and we have 5 permaculture gardens on our own campus that provide for this co-curricular type of learning experience, but also the buildings and the structure you put into play. We're very focused on designing buildings that are LEED Gold and above, and setting stretch goals for ourselves. The idea of also personalization, as we start to look at, you know, how we customize menu items, how we're able to develop that menu items that create that unique experience for each student. Yes, there are some downfalls to the idea, but at the same token, you know, we want to be able to showcase the fact that, you know, that personalization is a key aspect. This is a slide that we utilize that I pulled from a Data Central, who are talking more of a global view of what we're looking at when it comes to personalization. We've seen a very high success rate when it comes to very customized meals. Again, looking at the health and wellness aspect of it, the small plate, big flavor, being able to focus in on just what the student and the customer wants, not trying to go, and many times we're looking at what perceived value is. Perceived value at times can be saying, look, you know, we are, you know, more is better. Well, quality is better. Trying to create, you know, a shared dining experience. Those are the things we're trying to really work on, as opposed to trying to just give them a lot of food for very low healthful, you know, as well as, you know, just a low cost type of a scenario when you're just giving the cheapest possible food available. One of the things we'll look at when we talk, and this is a quote from our chancellor, is that there is a lot of waste that can be recovered. As we saw the National Resource Defense Council quote of over 40% of all household food is wasted. That flies in the face as well as when you want to look at scenarios where you're concerned about things about food insecurity. And one in 5, 1 in 7. You pick the statistic on that, but you have to be mindful of the fact that food has value, and by reducing waste is not only having an environmental impact upon it, but it also has a scenario where you can also recoup that savings and put it back into higher quality food, creating more experiences for students, as well as being able to help those in need by either utilizing programs like the Food Recovery Network or any other different type of programs that focus in on gleaning type of food. What does the future of dining look like for us? Well, the future of dining looks like for us a scenario where, when we started off in 2013 and had a scenario where we did the remodel of the Hampshire Commons, and this Commons was designed specifically to be a circular servery, which we found that by doing so, we were able to reduce food waste. Students tend to want to figure out what they want, and they're not eating off of one straight line. Students actually lining up tended to actually waste more food. And also looking at areas where you could have more throughput. As you start to reduce the need for a gargantuan building, because you can work on throughput, you're reducing your energy cost. You're also increasing your customer satisfaction because they're able to get in and out faster and being able to enjoy a meal as opposed to looking around for where they're going to get their food. The other idea is also focusing on healthfulness and looking at how we can start to do this is customization in action with action stations, and being able to look at how we're able to increase the amount of plant-based proteins, even reduce sugary beverages, of which we don't even serve soda in this particular location. And in this particular location alone, I think they're doing 30 plus cases of fruit every single day. So it's proof that students will eat healthier food if it's presented to them in a manner that looks appealing. The next area that we look at is our Worcester Commons, and this is a rendering of what we're doing, and it would be completed in 2020. The building was built in the 50s, clearly needs it has a variety of issues concerning with it, accessibility, cooking, obviously even when it comes to operations, that it's not it's not as efficient as it possibly could. So when we want to look at how we're designing, creating a shared student experience, being able to have not only retail operations, but also the residential location, being able to add, which we have in the middle here, which is a teaching kitchen, and being able to teach students how they can eat healthier, being able to incorporate our food hall type of an area where we have a variety of different global cuisines mixed in all together, and being able to create different types of utilizing one station for multiple purposes really allows us to consolidate, but yet still create that amazing dining experience. What's some of the student impact that's going on here? Well, when we start to look at, in terms of, I mentioned about diet and how it worked in terms of overall healthfulness, we can see this is a study that we were working on in conjunction with the School of Public Health and Nutrition here at UMass. And as you take a look at even students who have a higher diet in green leafy vegetables, and have a higher instance of normal body weight, lower instances of overweight, obesity. The next aspect, and this is an interesting slide, when we start to look at how diet and GPA come into play, and we start to look at students who have a higher diet in plant-based proteins, fruits and vegetables, and dark greens, tend to have higher. And it's a correlative. This isn't causal. It doesn't mean if you eat your vegetables you get straight A's. This means that students who want to use or who eat healthier diets have a higher tendency in terms of their performance and in terms of maximization of what they can do. In other aspects, we look at even areas of instances of lower instances of anxiety. And this all, again, it's all tied to the power of the food and how a diet more rich in plant-based ingredients can tend to help a student reach the potential that that particular student is hoping to do so. Back to a quick overview of our food waste here. This is a scenario where we wanted to look at overall how and what food waste looks like. We mentioned a little bit earlier on about the 40% from the National Resource Defense Council. We're at about 9.4%. And that is achieved through additional training, focusing on service, as well as the idea of being able to serve a variety of different foods that are a variety of different manners, using less SKUs, meaning less different menu items, less ingredients, but using simpler ingredients in a variety of different settings. It allows us to not only reduce our food waste, but we keep our food costs in line as well. Overall, when we want to look at the impact of what students are looking at and how they identify, the key aspect here is that everyone comes together around food, and we can create a shared food experience. And that dining is one of those things that can contribute positively to a student's sense of being, as well as, as we saw, that these are not for college days alone, and that students will continue to eat a healthier diet going into the future, and as a consumer are more and are willing to adapt and to try new things, and be able to create those relationships around food while they are experimenting and learning, as well as looking to see how that particular food or menu item could help them perform better as a student. So for us, dining is not just about feeding students, it's about creating that experience, about sharing knowledge, as well as constantly improving. And we've found that over the years that these particular ingredients and focusing in on more of a plant-based diet is something that we're seeing is not only for today, but for many years to come. And I thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Allison now for our segment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Leach, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of New Hampshire in natural resources. So far today, we heard from Julian about a great overview on the health and environmental impacts of different food products. And Garrett talked about some fantastic initiatives at UMass Amherst that they're doing for sustainable food, and also researching and surveying sustainable food on their campus. So I really enjoyed the first two sections. Now, in this final section of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about how you can track your sustainable food using a new tool called SIMAP. And SIMAP is a tool for campuses to calculate their carbon and nitrogen footprints together in a single tool. It's a web-based platform, and it now includes food. And my research is primarily in nitrogen footprints. And a lot of the work in SIMAP around food has been driven by the nitrogen footprint incorporation, because you'll see that nitrogen, food is very important for nitrogen footprints. So what is SIMAP? It's an online platform for tracking your campus carbon and nitrogen footprint together. And it brings together two tools. An existing tool that many of you all probably use to track your campus carbon footprints was developed at the University of New Hampshire in 2001. And there were several different versions of this tool. Originally, the Excel-based campus carbon calculator. It then went to Clean Air, Cool Planet, and there was a web-based version called Carbon Map. And it has been used by thousands of institutions across the US and abroad. The nitrogen footprint is a newer concept. It was just developed in 2009 as a project that I worked on there with collaborators like Jim Galloway and Izzy Kastner and Libby Milo. And it was an Excel-based tool, and it completed pilot testing by a great group of about 24 campuses that used and tested this tool before we incorporated it into SIMAP last year. And we just launched SIMAP last November. And why did we do this? Why did we build a totally new tools? The first reason was to have a broader picture of environmental impacts. So the carbon footprint, of course, is tracking greenhouse gas emissions and the contribution to climate change, which is, of course, very important to track and reduce. The nitrogen footprint brings in other environmental impacts, ranging from the local scale, like contributions to local water quality and air quality problems, all the way to the global scale with impacts like contributing to climate change and stratospheric ozone depletion. SIMAP also gives us a single tracking tool. You don't have multiple tools where you need to enter your data, a single tool where you enter your data and get both footprints out. We've also been able to integrate with other sustainability reporting platforms. We know that all campuses are working on lots of different sustainability metrics, and we're trying to streamline some of that. So for example, if any of you are Second Nature climate commitment signatories, you can directly export your footprint data from SIMAP into Second Nature's reporting platform. And we're working with other organizations to expand these features in the future. One aspect that I'm very excited about is the research component that will have a fantastic aggregated data set so we can start to assess the state of campus sustainability and track it over time. And finally, the new tool has a small feed that allows us to continue to support the tool. We've got a fantastic person working on user support, Julia Rothenberg, who many of you all have probably talked with if you've had any questions about using SIMAP. And this is just a screenshot of what you see when you're logged into the tool to give you a sense of what's in it. This is what you see when you're logged in with an account. If you don't have an account yet and you're interested in just exploring the tool, you're still able to see the About page and the Resources page to see what goes into the tool, the methodology, where to get started. And there is a free version of the tool available as well. You can see at the bottom of the home page, there's information on what functionality is available with the 2-month free account. And then the Tier 1 account has additional features like customization, import and export of your data, and the export to other reporting platforms. And we're working on a lot of new functionality like multi-campus and projections and solutions and complete scope 3. And we're always incorporating new features based on user feedback. So if any of you all are interested in using SIMAP or using it now and have comments, please send them to us so we can incorporate them. Okay, so what does your data look like in SIMAP? So this is the results page, and you can see here that there's food at the top. So for this particular account, we have food data for both the carbon footprint and for the nitrogen footprint. And you can see for nitrogen, it is pretty significant. So here I have a graph of UNH's, University of New Hampshire's nitrogen and carbon footprints side by side. And these are all the sectors that we're tracking now in UNH's footprint. And you can see that food is a pretty big contributor. In the campuses that we've looked at so far, for nitrogen, food contributes over half, usually more than 3/4 of a campus's tracked nitrogen footprint. And on the carbon side, it's contributing 5 to 15% of carbon footprints. So again, that's not an insignificant proportion. That's still a very important component to consider as we're looking towards reductions. And following the background that Julian provided, this lines up very well with that, where you can see that the meat products have by far the biggest contribution to the footprints, followed by dairy, eggs, fish, and finally vegetables. So we're going to look very briefly at what you would do to get a food data set and enter it into SIMAP. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of this work in developing these methods was done by the Nitrogen Footprint Tool Network. If any of you all are interested in joining that group, please just let me know. So the very first thing you need is a data set. You need to request your food purchase records. And if you're already tracking your food data for another sustainability initiative, like the Real Food Challenge, or ASHI Stars, you've already got most of the data that you'll need. It just needs to be processed a little bit differently for SIMAP because the factors that we have, the emissions factors, are all based on the weight of food products. So they're tied to how much product is actually being grown or produced. And so you'll need to calculate the weights of the products. And I just gave one quick example right here of the first line item in this purchase report right here. And you then categorize that product into one of the 18 food categories because the food emissions factors are product specific. And in SIMAP, the data that you need to enter for each product or each category is first, what's your date range, a label a descriptive label so you know what it is. And the most important pieces are what the food category is and how much that product weighs, because those are the two pieces of information that we need to calculate the carbon and nitrogen footprint of a food product. There's also a number of different optional data entry points that you can track and that we're starting to add in emissions factors for. So for example, we have a different set of emissions factors for local food for carbon and for nitrogen. You also have the option to enter in additional food categories if you have a multi-ingredient product like a frozen lasagna, for example, that has distinct ingredients in it. And you can track any notes you have and your confidence level. Many campuses are also just using a subset of their data. If any of you all have worked with these food data sets, you know they can be quite large and cumbersome to process. And so it is an option to select just a subset of your data, such as 1 month or 1 location, and to then scale that data to represent your entire campus with a food scaling factor. And there's more information about all of this on a SIMAP under the Resources tab. We have a user's guide that lays out these steps and a food template for collecting this data. So as far as collecting this, or actually entering this data into SIMAP, there's 2 options. One option is to manually enter that food data into SIMAP, where you add each individual product in the tool. And this can be done on a category basis, so all of the entire weight of all chicken purchased, for example, or an individual product basis. And given the size of these data sets, we also developed a food data collection template, which you can see a screenshot of at the bottom here, so that you could organize your food data in a spreadsheet and then import it to SIMAP. And so that means you wouldn't have to go into the individual line item data entry. And that's available on the Resources tab. And you can also see all of the food conversion factors we're using, the emissions factors, and the references within the tool. So here you can see it's at the very bottom of the data entry tab. It's called food conversion factors, and it lists out for every single product what factors we're using. And if you go to the Resources tab, you can see all of the references. Very briefly, those references are some work that my team has done for the nitrogen footprint of food products, and the carbon footprint factors come from another paper in the scientific literature, Heller and Keolian, that gives the full carbon footprint of food categories. And as Julian showed in some of his diagrams, there's really consistency across food products in terms of their environmental impacts, which is really a win-win in terms of sustainability. If you make a food choice to reduce one footprint, it's going to reduce the other footprints as well. So once you have your results, your food carbon and nitrogen footprint results, what can you do with them? Well, many of you all are probably working on other initiatives like these listed here, AC Stars, Real Food Challenge, Menus of Change, and the data that you get from SIMAP for your campus carbon and nitrogen footprint of food can back up some of these initiatives. There's a lot of great overlap with these. And the footprints are also helpful for communication, education, and outreach. My team has developed sustainability food labels that bring together the carbon, nitrogen, and water footprint of food products. And some campuses are starting to use these in their dining halls to both communicate the environmental impacts of food products and to actually do studies. There are some studies happening at the University of Virginia where they're working with social psychologists to see how these labels influence food purchasing choices. And once you've calculated your food carbon and nitrogen footprints in SIMAP, we also have a template, an Excel-based template that you could use to then start analyzing scenarios and see how management strategies to your food purchases would affect your carbon and nitrogen footprints. And this is not yet built into the SIMAP tool, and it's an Excel-based template that's in beta mode right now, but we're actually looking for beta testers. So if you're interested in using this template and giving us some feedback, please just send us an email. And it is compatible with SIMAP, so you're able to export your data from SIMAP and paste it directly into this template. And you get out results like this. These are some examples that we ran at UNH for a few different select scenarios that we've looked at. And you can see some of these I noted as feasible, some of these were not feasible or just for demonstration to give an idea of the types of reductions possible. For example, replacing 25% of beef with chicken would reduce the nitrogen footprint by 4%. And a 10% vegetarian meal replacement would reduce the nitrogen footprint by 5%. And then one that we just ran as more of a thought experiment was what would our footprint be if we had a vegetarian campus, not something we're recommending, but to show what a lower limit really of this footprint could be. And that gave us a 47% reduction. And local food had a relatively small reduction. And we ran these same scenarios for carbon, and these reductions are for the overall footprint. So because carbon makes up a smaller percentage of the overall footprint, the reductions are not as large, but they are still reductions. So again, back to that win-win where you get a reduction of both your carbon and nitrogen footprint, as well as your water and land and ecological and all footprints. They do really line up quite well. So to summarize this final section, SIMAP is a new tool just launched last year that you can use to calculate your campus carbon and nitrogen footprints together. And in addition to this tool from previous versions is that food quantification is now available. You can calculate the carbon and nitrogen footprint of your campus food purchases. We're working on a number of next steps here, and this is a relatively new module, so we're always looking for feedback. And soon you'll be able to customize all of those food factors. So if you have your own emissions factors or food miles, you'll be able to customize those in SIMAP. We're adding in some alternative food production factors, emissions factors, and working on some conversion. So if you do have your data set available in dollars right now for food, some conversion factors so you could get those to weight. So I think we'll just have a few minutes here at the end for questions. Thank you all very much for joining us and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Julian, Garrett, and Ali. We have a couple of questions, and I will try to get them all in before the end of the webinar. So let's go straight to the questions. This one is probably for all three of you. Our sustainability office wanted to showcase plant forward meals at our events. We had a bigger event and got a lot of backlash on some of the comments were, I didn't know that in order to be sustainable, you had to be vegan or vegetarian. There are many options such as poultry or seafood that could have been served and are sustainable. Or I'm not vegetarian vegan and I recommend you offer a selection for all types of eaters. Or I am vegetarian and appreciated the food, but your selection wasn't filling enough. Next time, make sure you talk to a vegetarian to organize your menu. How do we counteract some of these comments? And maybe let's go to Julian and then Garrett and then Ali.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what I'll say just briefly is that I think it's really important. I mean, maybe like the last comment, you know, is like really considering the context. I think is extremely important. So thinking about like kind of what, you know, your eaters' habits typically are, and making sure that you're kind of mapping on the types of foods, the cuisines that they're interested in. And then also kind of just thinking about the strategy is like, I don't think it needs to be vegan or vegetarian. I don't think there needs to be a super strong like line there. I think, you know, we have like a pretty strong environmental sort of responsibility to kind of rebalance our diets. And I think higher education institutions should be kind of leading the way in that, because they are these knowledge bases. And so I think there can be, you know, a strong explanation for that, but I think it's really about kind of just changing the proportion. I don't know if that's fully answering that complex question, but that's the best I can do.
So building off of that, the idea of not having to, and again, the way that students identify how they're eating, I think it's more of a mindful approach to what they're consuming, and the idea that there are flavor canvases that can be held with not only, you know, animal-based protein, but also plant-based protein, so that, you know, you don't need to be sustainable to be and be, you know, vegan, vegetarian, but in reality, if you will lead a much more sustainable approach to how you eat, if you start to shift your diet, as well as when we start to look at the, you know, global population growth, how are we going to be able to feed the world? Yes, you're probably going to want to eat you're going to eat more of a plant-based diet, which, as we start to look at, has the same the benefits, if not better, when it comes to your overall health, as well as does not have significant impacts when it comes to like iron intake and things like that. You can still achieve that through a plant-based approach.
And the only thing I'll add to that is just that I think that it's important to have a lot of communication at these events around the health benefits and the environmental benefits of choosing vegan and vegetarian options. And you don't need to be a vegan or vegetarian all the time to have some of those benefits, but I think having a clear communication of those benefits is really helpful for those events.
Thank you very much. Another question is, there seem to be a decent number of organizations working to categorize or track food and GHGs. like Food Forward, Friends of the Earth, World Research Institute, SIMAP? Are there efforts to coordinate so we can set up our database tracking systems to compare across universities?
Yes, that is something that we're going to be working on, as well as streamlining the data processing efforts across different food sustainability assessment tools. And so once we have more campuses that are using SIMAP to track their food data, we will be able to do some comparisons with an aggregated data set for the sustainability of those food campuses.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions related to SIMAP. So, Ali, these are for you. Why should we care about nitrogen footprint if it goes hand in hand with carbon reduction?
That is a great question. And so if you are reducing your carbon footprint, you will be reducing your nitrogen footprint as well. So you don't really necessarily need to know what your nitrogen footprint is to reduce it, because you could be reducing it anyway with carbon. But a great benefit to tracking the nitrogen footprint is that the distribution of the nitrogen footprint across the different sectors is quite different from carbon. So for example, a big part of the nitrogen footprint is food. So reductions to your food component will have a big reduction to your nitrogen footprint overall. And the other reason to track them separately, or to have a calculation of your nitrogen footprint, is that the environmental impacts of your nitrogen footprint are, there are more environmental impacts for a nitrogen footprint than carbon. And in particular, there are local impacts from nitrogen, from any local nitrogen sources on your campus. So one thing that we're doing at the University of New Hampshire is we're actually working on setting nitrogen footprint reduction goals just around our scope 1 footprint, because those reductions can have an impact directly to our local environmental quality, and then having separate goals for more of the upstream emissions. And so I think the ability to link to those additional environmental impacts and general education around the environmental impacts of our food choices, energy choices, and so on, make it really important to assess both of these footprints, as well as others. So in the future, we'd like to add in the water footprint and the phosphorus footprint and other sustainability metrics into SIMAP.
Thank you. So when, where, and how are you getting the emissions factors for nitrogen? And this established for the entire country, or broken up based on a sector or region?
So the factors that we have were developed by my team, and we have a few references that are available on SIMAP where you can see the papers that describe the methodology behind it. And the factors are US averages for conventional food production. We do have the level of detail that goes down to individual states, but in the SIMAP tool itself, we have the US averages because of how much food is typically transported. And there will soon be the option to customize your emissions factors, and our team has a paper in review right now on the nitrogen footprint of organic food production. So once that's in the scientific literature, we would add those factors into SIMAP as well.
Thank you, Ali. And our last question, I think it's also for you. You mentioned the ability to label food as local as well in SIMAP. Is there a definition of local used in the program, or does each institution using it create their own definition?
The definition we currently have for local is 250 miles of transport, but when the food factors are customizable in the next few weeks here, institutions will be able to change that local mile distance to whatever is appropriate for their campus and their own definition.
Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you to all of our presenters. Before we conclude today's webinar, I wanted to also remind everyone about our next webinar taking place next week on Wednesday. This webinar highlights the Student Sustainability Committee at JCCC, including project highlights, funding, structure, and strategies for replication. You can learn more about this webinar and our other professional development offerings on our website, and I hope you'll join us again. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and to everyone for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to contact the presenters or myself at the emails on the screen. And as I said at the beginning, the recording and presentation materials will be available in the ASHE Campus Sustainability Hub tomorrow, and you'll receive a notification once they're uploaded. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks so much.